Isn't this cool? A little Friday treat. Ruby's doing well. Ruby's doing well. This is the lime version of Kirkland sparkling water, but you can see it catches the green screen on here. Kind of like drinking the Coliseum. Anyway, everyone, let's get this party started. Welcome, class, to Classics 160B1. Meet the Ancients! All right, let's get this party started. I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to finally start talking about your project for the semester. Let's go ahead and fire up the projector, turn down the lights, and take a look at lecture 3.3, Introducing the Final Project. All right, no, I know it's not Celsius. I don't have the Celsius yet. I will get it. You guys just be patient. It's going to happen. It takes some time to obtain these things. All right, here's what we've got on the docket for today. We'll start with a few announcements. We are going to recap the Aegean Bronze Age, what's happening in the area of Greece during the period from around 3000 BC to around 1200 BC. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the final project. And I'll show you some examples of previous final projects, both from this class and some other ones that would serve as a useful parallel. And then finally, what I'll do, most of you guys can take off then. If you're interested in participating in the honors project, feel free to stick around, and I will take you through what that project is going to be like. All right, so what are our announcements for today? You guys know the basics. Put this thing in speaker view. You can see me. You can see the slides. You can see the words. You can see the images. You can see everything you need. If you have a question, please go ahead and direct that to your TA. They'll get back to you, or they'll funnel that to me. Attendance will probably be relatively early in this class. So just like in case, you're drinking a lot of Kirkland brand sparkling water and you need to go to the bathroom or something, just keep an eye out for that. Save it to the end of class so you can get your attendance in. All right, so recapping the Bronze Age. All right, when we started last time, right, we had mainly been focused over in Mesopotamia, which is off this map way over here, right, kind of behind my head. And we've been looking at Egypt, which is also off of this map, way down here. And finally, what we did is we started moving westward and a little bit north into the Mediterranean. And so when we're looking at the Aegean world, what that tends to be in antiquity is this area of Western Turkey, modern-day Turkey, mainland Greece, and then all the islands kind of in between those two. So the largest one being Crete. You have a group of islands known as the Cyclades because they're kind of sort of in a circle. I know it's not that good of a circle, but they're kind of a circle. That's what they thought in antiquity, at least. Centered on the sacred island of Delos. And these are where our Aegean Bronze Age cultures develop. And so we're going to go ahead and recap two of them today. We'll talk about the Minoans on the island of Crete and on some of the other islands. And then we'll also talk about the Mycenaeans on mainland Greece. So one of the big takeaways that we saw last time, right, is that things develop in the Aegean world much, much slower than they do in the kind of other parts that we've looked at so far, right? So things are developing much slower in the Aegean than they are in Egypt, for example. What you're looking at on the right-hand side here is known as the House of the Tiles from the site of Lerna in Greece. And in the kind of early part of the 2000s BC, the third millennium BC, this is the biggest structure that we've got. And it was very important because it's one of the first sites where we have actually tiles, roof tiles, like you see on like a Mediterranean style house. At the same time this was constructed in Greece, we've got like the pyramids of Giza being built over in Egypt. And so early on, we're just talking about a very different speed of development and scale of development, with Mesopotamia and Egypt really leading the way. Now, that doesn't last Well, sorry, not quite there yet. That doesn't mean that Greece isn't producing some cool things. And one of the coolest artifacts from this early period of the Bronze Age are what are known as these Cycladic figurines, because they come from the Cyclades Islands. And here you can see that they're these kind of abstract, stylized, sort of geometric statuettes of human figures. And scholars think that they might have something to do with reproduction, because you have things like breasts and genitalia emphasized in these. Although you do get a few, right? It's the minority, but you get a few of people actually doing things. And this is a famous one of a harpist over here. Okay, so even though things get started a little bit later in the Greek world, they do end up developing some fairly large-scale structures. And when we looked at the Minoans, the main structure we looked at was the Palace of Minos at the site of Knossos. And we told the story of King Minos, right? And the sacrifice of the bull that didn't happen the right way. Eventually, he's got a minotaur to deal with, which he puts in the labyrinth. And one of the things that we saw was that when you look at the actual archaeological plan, right, the architectural plan of Knossos, you can see that it kind of sort of resembles a labyrinth, and there were connections made between those sites, both in antiquity and in the modern world. Now, when we study this from a more kind of academic perspective, what we end up seeing is that all these things that kind of make it look like a labyrinth aren't necessarily for like a minotaur to run around in, but rather for the storage of goods. And what we think happened here is that people specialized in some sort of agriculture or shepherding or something like that, and whatever their specialty was, they would send that off to the palace. And then the palace, in turn, would gather all these things and then send things back to the people. And this is what we call a redistributive economy. And you saw in the Linear B tablets that you were reading about that quite a lot of those things have to do with economic goods and resources. Olive oil and cattle and sheep and that sort of thing. Now, one of the weirdest things that we're looking at here is even with a structure of this size, we have no defensive walls. And this is absolutely bizarre in the ancient world. The first thing you do is you build defensive walls so that neighbors don't come along and take your stuff. But we don't get that at the site of Knossos, and in fact, we don't get that at any of the Minoan palaces. What we do get are beautiful frescoes. And remember, that's kind of the term for a painting where you actually paint on the wet plaster and the color becomes part of the wall itself. That's why they're preserved. And for the Minoan world, what we get flora, right? We get plants and flowers, and we get fauna. We get octopuses and dolphins and blue monkeys. Super weird stuff, but kind of beautiful and peaceful and bucolic. We also get a very heavy emphasis on the bull. So the bull is very closely associated with Minoan culture. And here what you're looking at is another fresco of some sort of athlete or acrobat leaping over the back of the bull. And so we think the way this worked is the bull would charge and the person would run the other direction, and then at exactly the right moment he would leap into the air and kind of do a flip off of the bull's back. And if you take my ancient athletics course, we'll talk about this in much more detail and about the debate as to whether this was a sport or kind of a acrobatic performance or some sort of religious ritual. And we think that based on the kind of characters over here who we interpret as possible priests. And we see this bull, the reason we think it's such a core part of Minoan culture is we see it in a lot of other contexts as well. And so we see it on pottery, right? We see these rhytons, these pouring vessels actually in the shape of a bull, so you can put wine in the back and then it pours out either the mouth or the nostrils. You see what's over here called the horns of consecration. And this is where we think sacrifices were performed. So the bull is kind of intimately tied to Minoan culture and a big part of what we think Minoan religion operated as. And at the end of our discussion of the Minoans last time, we talked a little bit about the island of Santorini, the modern island of Santorini, which has the ancient site of Thera on it. And in the 1500s BC, there was a massive volcanic eruption. And it blew the island apart, right? So when you go to the island today, all you see is kind of the edge of the island. And the whole middle is filled with water. And everybody kind of lives up on the rim, what we call the caldera of the volcano. And this place has several Minoan sites, Thera being the biggest one, or Akrotiri, being the biggest of the sites. People have hypothesized that maybe the myth of Atlantis, right, this sophisticated society that then sunk to the bottom of the ocean, is based on this Minoan culture, or the Minoan sites of Thera, that did indeed get kind of blasted away and covered in volcanic ash, and some of them probably went down to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea as that caldera filled with water. So those are the Minoans, right? Heavy emphasis on the bull, flora and fauna, very peaceful in the sense that we don't get defensive walls. There's not a lot of militaristic imagery. And that all changes when we look at the Mycenaeans. Now we move from Crete, which is the island down here, north and west to mainland Greece. And with the Mycenaeans, we get the exact opposite. So what you're looking at here is the site of Mycenae, and you can see from this aerial photo, very, very, just massive defensive walls, right? Faced on both sides, filled with rubble in the middle. These are fairly large in scale. And here we can see reconstructions of both of the sites, right? The Minoan palace, very elaborate, no walls. The Mycenaean fortress, also very elaborate, but with massive defensive walls. And we can see, you can still go visit those walls today. You can see what they look like here. We actually call them Cyclopean walls because these stones are so huge, right, that only a Cyclops could lift such a thing. And inside this structure, you can actually see where the burials occurred. So you can see it from the aerial photo here. These large, round, empty spaces, these are where these shaft tombs were sunk. And inside those tombs were the royal burials, where we get a lot of these golden masks, right? And the one down in the center here is known as the Mask of Agamemnon, the legendary king of Mycenae who shows up in the Iliad. Although it's debated whether this is actually real or a fake, because it's the only one with a beard, and the beard looks suspiciously like the way people had beards in like the late 19th century, early 20th century, when Heinrich Schliemann was excavating this place. So that's still debated. What we also get in these tombs is a lot of material culture focused on warfare. So we've already seen the massive defensive walls. Over here, we've got these kind of bronze swords. On the bronze swords, we see more militaristic imagery with hunting scenes. We've got boar's tusk helmets, and that's actually going to come up again next week. So, right, they have wild boars in Greece, and these are this is made out of the tusks of those boars. And this is very interesting. We'll see it next week, where it dates to the Bronze Age very clearly, right, around 1400 BC. But it shows up in the writings of Homer, who is writing maybe 600 years later. And so what we think there, right, is that Homer, in his construction of the Iliad and Odyssey, is trying to recall this time of heroes in the Bronze Age. And we'll see some of the strengths and weaknesses of that hypothesis next week. Okay, now one of the other things that we ended up getting is what you guys read for today, right? The Linear B tablets. So this is our not our earliest, it's our earliest translated writing from Greece. On Crete, we also have these Linear A tablets, which has a different script to it, but nobody's translated that, and so we don't know what they say. With the Linear B tablets, these were translated about 50 years ago by a guy by the name of Michael Ventris, and what we found out is what you guys read. These are not particularly exciting stories about the ancient world. You're not getting a version of the Iliad or the Odyssey. You're not getting the story of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia. What you're getting are almost like accounting records, right? This is how many bulls came to the capital, right? This is how much olive oil somebody's owed. Maybe there's a reference to a god or a goddess somewhere in there, but these are very kind of bureaucratic record-keeping tablets, not being used for telling stories. So again, something very, very different than what we see happening several hundred years later. One of the things we're going to talk about next week is what happens at the end of the Bronze Age. And one of the things that does happen is that people forget how to write for 400 years. So we've got writing, we've got these Linear B tablets, we go through the Dark Ages, they completely forget how to write for 400 years, and then when writing comes back, we've got the Iliad. It's a bizarre thing, so we'll talk more about that as we go. Now that is ushered in, the Dark Ages, again we'll talk next week, are ushered in around 1200 BC, maybe a little bit afterwards. And again, people debate the cause of that, and that's going to be one of our topics of discussion as we move forward. The Sea Peoples, which at the same time were invading Egypt, are a popular theory for what's happened in the Mediterranean at this time to see large-scale collapse in many different places. Okay, so that is our kind of recap from last time. What I'd like to do now is move into the final project. And the first thing I would like to say is you can find the assignment sheets for the final project on D2L. Go up to assignments, you can click on the tab, you can look at, when you go down to project components, you can see the research proposal first draft, research proposal final draft, and then final project. And those are the 3 assignment sheets. I think one of them might have a due date on there that says something like December. That's pulled from a different semester. Go with the due dates that are entered into D2L. You'll see the due dates next to them, and I'll talk about those in a second. Okay, so the final project. This is a research project, and what I want to do to begin with is talk a little bit about what research is, because nobody ever really tells you, and it's a little bit different to some extent than kind of what you think. And really what the project's going to be, it's going to be research light, or kind of almost research. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. So a great metaphor for the type of research that we do within academia, right, at the college level, a great kind of analogy or allegory is a cocktail party, all right? So imagine you're going to a cocktail party and you show up at your friend's house and you're dressed very nice like this guy and you have a nice martini or whatever he's drinking. But when you get to the party, people are already there, right? People have been at this party for a while, they are having conversations, and you don't just butt your head in and start talking because you're going to sound like an idiot. Instead, what you do, right, is you walk up and you listen for a while. And you listen to what the conversation is, and Bill is talking to Sally, and Sally's talking to whoever else, and they're going back and forth about whatever topic it is they're talking about. Now, after you've listened for a while, you've got a sense for how that conversation has been progressing. And you've started to think about what you might be able to contribute to that conversation that other people haven't already said, right? You don't want to just say the same thing as somebody else. So after you've listened for a while, right, you then start to contribute, and you say something about whatever the topic is. And then Bill responds to you, and Sally responds to you and to Bill, and whoever the third person is responding to all of you, and then you respond to them again. And you have this dialogue that doesn't just happen once. You don't just say one thing and then leave. Instead, it's a dialogue that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, eventually, you get tired, right? And you maybe had one too many of your little martinis over here, and you call your Uber home because you're not driving home, and you leave the party. But when you leave, the party's still going on. The party hasn't ended, right? And maybe Bill and Sally and whoever else it is are still talking to each other about whatever the topic was that you guys were discussing. And here's the analogy here, okay, right? What this means is that when you start doing research, you don't immediately just start making claims about the ancient world because you don't have any expertise in it yet. What you do is you put in the time to listen and read what others have said about your topic, right? You figure out what the main debates are and who advocates for which positions. And then when you start to feel like you've got enough information, then you put forth your own ideas. But the goal of this isn't necessarily to finish the conversation. Your goal is not to say something about whatever your topic is and have everybody else shut up about it. What you want is you want to kind of spark further investigation, further debate, and further conversation about whatever it is you're talking about. And good research, when you leave, when you're done with that project, it continues to go on. And people will respond to what you've said. And they'll take that in new and interesting directions. And so that's just kind of one of the, I think that's a really good kind of analogy or allegory for research, where what you're doing is you're contributing to an ongoing conversation. And you're hopefully adding something new to that conversation, but you're not shutting it down, right? You're contributing something new, and then others will continue to build on what you've put forth. So anyway, I leave that for you guys there because it was something that I don't think I learned until like mid to late graduate school. About how this thing actually worked. I kind of thought you were trying to answer a question definitively once and for all. And it's not really necessarily the case. Okay, so that's kind of what research is in general. And what you guys are going to do over the course of this semester is take a deep dive into some sort of narrow topic related to antiquity, right? So you're going to go find what the ancient evidence is for that. You're going to find what modern scholars have said about that topic. And then you're going to say something yourself about it. And what we're going to see when we look at the examples, some people do a better job than others of kind of being able to contribute their own answer or analysis. Some of them are more kind of like summaries of research than actually contributing something new. Different things along that spectrum will work for this class, okay? So don't feel like you have to come up with an entirely new theory of something. But a really good project will try to contribute something new to our understanding of antiquity. So that's the goal over the course of the semester. Now this is going to happen in 3 different steps, all right? So you're going to begin with a research draft of your research proposal, okay? And what you're doing there, this is very short, 250 words, same length as the weekly writing assignments. And what I want to hear from you in that is what your topic is, why it's important for helping us understand antiquity, what some potential sources are, right? If you're going to say that the Iliad is a source, I don't need you to have read the entire Iliad yet. Too early in the semester for that, okay? But I do want you to have a little bit of an understanding about what it says and why it might contribute to your topic. And then I also want to hear a potential outlet for the research. And that's going to be because the final project could take a couple different forms. Now, the second step here is looking at the final draft. And what you're going to do is you're going to take what you've done early in the semester, you're going to build on it, and you're going to expand it, okay? So it's going to move from 250 words to at least 750 words. And here you're going to start putting forth some answers to the research question that you started with, right? So here, in the second one, if you said the Iliad was one of your sources, by the middle of April, I definitely do want you to have read whatever segment of that book is relevant for your topic, right? Here you're going to start to actually answer things. And then for the final component, what you're going to do is you're going to take the research question you've got And you're going to take the ancient sources and the modern sources and all the analysis that you've done. And you're going to find some sort of cool and interesting digital way to convey this to a broad audience. Think of somebody who thinks like history's really cool, but doesn't have any expertise in what you're actually talking about, right? That's kind of the audience that we're going for. They're excited about history, but they don't really know a bunch of details, okay? And so that's kind of the tone that I want. And in terms of formats for that final project, be creative, okay? There's examples on the assignment sheet, but this could be a documentary. It could be a music video. It could be a travel brochure. It could be some sort of website that you create. It could be like a little whiteboard animation type thing. There's a lot of different options here. Be creative. And part of the idea is I want you to either build skills in one of those kind of digital technologies to produce this, or I want you to kind of start learning the skill, right? If you're like, man, I've never done any video production, but I think that would be a cool skill to have, go for it, right? Or if you're like, I've never done any website building, but like it's always been on my list of things to try to learn, go for it, right? Use this as an opportunity to build a skill that's going to be useful for you in the future. Okay, so those are the three main components of the project, and you can see the due dates here. So the first one's due in 3 weeks, February 19th, 3 weeks from today. The second one is kind of early April, and then the final thing is by the end of April. Question in the chat, is the work completely independent or is there any possibility to work in groups? Okay, I'm going to have details on this next week, but I'm going to put forth a preliminary answer that says, yes, you can work in groups, okay? The amount of work that you do is going to have to scale based on the number of people that you've got, all right? And I will have more details on that next week. So like, if you guys are working in a group, you can all submit the same research proposal draft, but it's gonna have to be more than 250 words, okay? And I'll let you know like what the number is and how you're gonna do that and how you'll let your TA know that you've got like, you know, a group going on. Because I think I've done this before, it's really embarrassing. Like if you turn in group work and it's all the same thing that you turn in, but somebody was like Billy Bob who turned it in, and so like they were being graded under the B's, and the other one was like Steve Smith who turned it in under the S's, and I gave Billy Bob like a 92 and I gave Steve Smith like an 88 or something, even though they turned in the exact same thing. And that's really embarrassing for us. So we want to make sure that if you do work in a group, everybody's going to get the same grade. And I will have more details for you on that moving forward. Karen, did you have something to jump in here and say?
Yeah, well, I mean, you said you were going to explain about it, but I just wanted to know, you know, for us TAs, if they are submitting work as groups, is there going to be only one single person submitting the work for the whole group? Or all of them are going to submit the same work?
Let me ask you, what is easier, do you think, from your end? Is it easier for them to have one person submit it and list the group members and then just enter the thing into D2L in the grade book?
Yeah, that would be easier because that way we will be grading only one single project and then we can just post the same grade and the feedback for everybody in the group, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. That's exactly what we'll do, okay? So I, again, will have the details in terms of how the amount of work scales, the maximum number of people. I think the maximum number of people is going to be 4, all right? And then exactly what we want you to do in terms of submitting that. But group work is good. Group work's hard, right? It's a lot of, it's a lot of effort to try to collaborate, especially when it's difficult to get together in person. But it's a great skill to build as well. If you can work effectively in a group, you're in good shape. So again, okay, I will give you more information on that as we move forward. And I'll tackle some of the other questions in the chat once we get to attendance, which happens to be right now. All right, now I can tackle some questions in the chat. Heracles loved research projects. Actually, he didn't love research. He was never known for being the smartest of the Greek heroes. And in fact, in Greek antiquity, he had a reputation for being a little bit of a drunk and kind of belligerent, getting by on his beefy good looks rather than his brains. But nonetheless, go ahead, go to D2L. Attendance quiz 5, not 27th. Not 27th, January 29th. Go to that one, click Brown. You got the answer. Okay, let me try to tackle a few of the questions in the chat here. Who are the sea peoples? We will talk about that next week, so that's coming your way. When referring to antiquity, can we do something like Middle Ages kind of stuff? 900, 1000. Here's what I would say, right? My number one thing I want you guys to get out of this is pick something that you really, really like and just research stuff about it, okay? Like, the work is going to turn out so much better if you genuinely love what you're looking into. So I will say yes, but I would like you to have some component to antiquity. So at least make some sort of comparison or something like that with whatever your specific topic is to ancient Greece or Rome. But you can have the majority of it be on something like the Middle Ages or Norse culture or something like that. Where's the final project in D2L? Go to assignments, scroll down, and then you'll find the 3 components right there. If we work in groups, does it have to be with people who have the same TA? No, we'll find a way around that. That's a great question and something I hadn't thought about. But we have the technology and brains to be able to deal with that. When is antiquity? That's a fantastic question. It seems so simple, but we haven't really defined it. Usually, we would say that antiquity ends sometime around 500 AD. And usually a rough date on it. The last class of the semester is going to be on when Rome actually ends. But a common date is 476 AD. And that's when the last Roman emperor, a guy by the name of Romulus Augustulus, is deposed by Odoacer the Ostrogoth. And so we'll shoot for something around there. Can we do a final project on Indian history? So here's what I would say with that again. I'm totally fine with that, but do make some kind of parallel or comparative aspect to something like that with ancient Greece or Rome or Egypt, something that we've kind of touched upon in the class. So again, find something you love and go for it, but do make at least some sort of parallel relationship to the kind of core content of the class. Greek mythology, Spartan culture, absolutely. That's right in the core of what we're doing. Greek mythology, absolutely. Persians, yep, Persia works for sure. Yep, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, can we take a project from a previous class and build on it? Yeah, what I would want you to do is if you do have a significant component that you're building onto from a project for a previous class, work with your TA on that and shoot them a link to what the previous project was so they can see what the starting point was, and then work with them to build on that appropriately. All right, so I'm getting lots of good questions here on topics, and here's what I want to do. I want to talk a little bit about topics. This is great, right? Leads right into it. How do we select a topic? Here's how this goes, okay? So usually good research comes about from the intersection of different types of things. Okay, from very different things. And what that means, right, is that if you can take antiquity over here and then something totally different and look at where they intersect, that's usually where really interesting research comes from. So here's what I want you to think about, right? Let me go one more. Okay, here's what I want you to think about. Think about different academic subjects that interest you outside of classics. I know everybody wants to be a classicist, that's awesome, but think about the other things that interest you. Is it politics or law or medicine or philosophy or art? science, whatever it is, right? Think about other academic topics you're interested in. And then think about what things you like doing totally outside of school, right? I like listening to music. I like playing basketball. I like whatever it is, right? I like driving my car around. And then start to think about how you can integrate some of these things with antiquity, right? If you're like, I love cars, right? I love driving cars and if that's your thing, start thinking about like modes of transportation in antiquity and what you could learn about them, right? How do carriages actually work? You want to know a really cool thing is like when you go to Pompeii, at the gates to the city, each city has different like ruts in the road of different widths. And what that means is that when you bring your cart to a new city, you actually have to change the like width of the axles. And that's a way that they get everybody to stop and pay taxes on the way into a city. So super cool stuff like that will emerge when you take a topic that you're very, very interested in and merge it with antiquity, all right? So that's kind of how I want you to be thinking about these things. Kind of come up with a list of things that you like academically, come up with a list of things that you like doing for fun, start thinking about different possible ways that those might intersect with the ancient world. And again, kind of the rule of thumb is I really want you to be interested in what you're doing. And even if that pushes the boundaries of the class a little bit, we're willing to work with you on that, right? Make some reference, some sort of comparative reference to the ancient Greek and Roman or Egyptian world. But the core of what you're doing, really, quality work is going to emerge when you're legitimately interested in what you're doing. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We'll tackle some of these. Let me answer some specific questions here. Can somebody study Heracles since he shows up in every class? Absolutely. How narrow is too narrow? It's almost impossible to be too narrow. We're going to talk about this moving forward, like kind of about scope. But it's almost like if this is the widest possible thing you can think of, and over here is like the narrowest possible thing, and like this is the middle, like being somewhere over here that's a good place to be. Okay, that's at least kind of how research operates at the collegiate academic level. Somebody's in the drugs in the ancient world class. Can you use sources from there? Absolutely, right? Yeah, definitely use that as a jumping off point. Law enforcement, law in the ancient world would be a great topic. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to look at a few examples of other projects. So I'm just going to show a minute or two of each of these kind of examples. These are ones that are really, really well done. So like, don't worry. I'm not expecting this sort of like quality from everybody in here, but it gives you something to shoot for, and it lets you see what some of the other people have shown here. So I'm going to go ahead and try to actually share my screen here. Let's see if this works. Get rid of this. Let's turn turn the lights back on here and try to share a screen. Share sound.
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I didn't see you. I was just admiring these fruit. Isn't it amazing? Fruit, food, all this produce, it's just vital for our survival. But even in today's society, not necessarily just for our survival. It's a form of social interaction. But we might wonder, where does all this food come from? Where does all this stuff that makes us social, where does it all come from? Well, does it fall from the sky? No. It comes from trees, farms, ranches, other forms of agriculture. Agriculture is so vital to our society today. We use it in everything, not just for food, but also for medicine, for materials, and many other forms. But we're not the first society to know this. Today, we're going to go into an ancient civilization of ancient Greece. Welcome, my name is Chandler Brown, and this is Chatting with Chandler. Welcome back. Today, we will be talking about Greece. And I'm not just talking Greece, Or Greece. I'm talking Greece, specifically in agriculture. Did you know that in ancient Greece, over 80% of the population was involved in harvesting and picking season? Now that's crazy. Compare that to the 13% of the US population that is involved in food and agriculture services today. Now if you don't believe me, let's go find out for ourselves. Come on. Wow, isn't this cool? Well, come on, let's go get to the vineyards. Wow, such beautiful orchards. Now these people, they knew how to harvest. Some of the things they harvested were things such as grains, grapes, and most importantly, olives. Delicious. Agriculture was a main source of income for the people. Because, like in Hesiod's Works and Days, he states that the people believed that money should not be seized, but should be God-given. So for them to make money, they needed good crops, and therefore they needed some good help from the gods. With harvesting being so important to the Greeks, they needed a little special help. That special help is from the goddess Demeter. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, and we understand that she is extremely important. We see in Homer's hymn to Demeter that when Demeter left her crops to go find her daughter Persephone, that all the crops withered and died. And that created a huge famine in the land. So, to prevent this famine from happening again, the people have a festival called the Thesmophoria. The Thesmophoria, it's a 3-day festival. And festival, I mean it's a party. It's held in autumn just for women. It's a way to honor Demeter and also to worship her for good harvest. The first day is a day where the women travel up to the shrine Thesmophorian. The second day is the day of fast. It's also a day of preparation because the third day is the day of the feast. It's a day where they make offerings to Demeter in hope for good harvest. As harvesting seasons begins, these people can begin to hope for good crops. Maybe we can be a little bit more appreciative and hope for good crops too. Thanks, Demeter. Well, it's time for me to get going on my own harvest. But if you'd like to know more, go ahead and read Homer's Hymn to Demeter or Hesiod's piece Works and Days. My name is Chandler Brown, and I'd like to thank you on this episode of Chatting with Chandler.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next one. One of the things, I'm going to post all these links so that you can go check them out later on. And one of the things he does later on is he really does a good job of talking about the ancient evidence for agriculture in the ancient world in the second half of this. So make sure to check that out. Here's another one on portraiture here.
Of all the different styles and subject matters of visual art, one of the most personal and probably most diverse is portraiture. Though the exact origin of portraiture is hard to pin down, the art form is commonly seen in ancient Egypt, Greek, and Roman artifacts. Early classical Greek portraiture stems from ancient Greek styles, and the purposes portraiture served in these two societies are similar. In ancient Greece, people used portraiture primarily for religious and funerary purposes, painting or sculpting the faces of gods, but also spending lots of time on art for burials. While coffins during the Old Kingdom were simple boxes painted with hieroglyphs, Middle Kingdom coffins were sometimes decorated with portraits of gods and would even feature a depiction of the deceased's face. These became more and more common and eventually led to the elaborate sarcophagi often associated with ancient Egypt today. The ancient Greeks used portraiture in a similar way. Like sarcophagi, death masks were common after a significant person died. The Mycenaean mask of Agamemnon is one example of this. However, because portraiture was used for funerary purposes, portraits were, as in ancient Egypt, generally very idealized. Even though portraits were still idealized, though, ancient Greek portraiture saw one big change in the fundamental aspects of portraiture. While ancient Egyptian portraits were only meant to be viewed from the front, as most of them were paintings or sculptures with only one feature of interest, Greek portraits, which were frequently made in the form of sculptures, were meant to be viewed from all angles. As a result, the stiffness commonly seen in early portraits began to go away. By the 5th century BCE, the contrapposto stance had become a staple in Greek sculpture, and the earlier straight-standing sculptures were becoming obsolete. The study of proportions was also emphasized, something later revived during the Renaissance. The subjects of portraits during classical Greece were, along with the dead, usually war heroes, political figures, and gods or goddesses, so portraits were idealized, but as Greek religion introduced the concept of a soul which transcends the body, the need to conform to idealism was weaker. In fact, the first ever portrait to be called a masterpiece, Portrait of Mausolus, was sculpted during this time period. It was the first to feature movement and realism so heavily. Though portraits were usually done in the form of sculptures, generally in marble, bronze, or stone, panel paintings and frescoes were not uncommon places to see portraits. All of these mediums were imitated during the Renaissance. Ancient Roman portraiture, also generally done in the form of sculpture and for the same reasons as Greek portraiture, was more realistic and less idealized than previously. While full-body sculptures were still made, marble busts were more popular and less time-consuming, making it easier for one artist to create lots of art featuring lots of different subjects, which ultimately led to the expansion of realism, as the people in sculptures were no longer just the most important political figures, war heroes, and religious figures. Some portraits were still idealized, namely those of emperors, but portraits of philosophers, scholars, political figures, and others were very true to life. Following the classical period, medieval art took a couple steps backwards in terms of realism. The theme of most medieval art was religion, so idealism was widely used in the Byzantine style, and art that was not explicitly religious just got weird. Two developments in portraiture occurred during this time period, though. The introduction of stained glass became a staple in religious portraiture, something that is still used today, and the use of oil paints became more common. After the medieval era, Renaissance portraiture revived many themes of classical art, like perspective, fixation with precise proportions, and the use of the contrapposto stance. Sculptures were often sculpted in ways similar to those of Roman times, featuring Roman-style dress and techniques. The hair is often sculpted the same way in Renaissance and Roman portraits, and usually stippling is used to depict facial hair. A couple notable portrait artists were Bellini, Rossellino, and Lotto, who began doing portraits for weddings when they were previously used primarily for funerals. As individualistic and humanistic ideologies grew, having portraits became more socially acceptable, which it wasn't during the medieval period because of the emphasis on religion and humility. This is probably part of the reason why portraiture expanded from being just for funerals and religious purposes to being for weddings and commemorating individuals. It's also important to note that this was the first time painting portraits of women was really common. After the Renaissance, oil paints became more readily available, and the subject matter of portraits started to shift from wealthy individuals to regular people in their everyday lives. This can be observed to some extent in the Baroque period, specifically in Vermeer's works, but people in ordinary settings is a more common theme in Impressionism. Titles reveal this. Renaissance works are called things like Portrait of Ginevra Benci or Portrait of Agnolo Doni, while Impressionistic and Baroque titles are things like Girl with a Pearl Earring, Girl with a Red Hat, or Self-Portrait with a Straw Hat. The purpose of portraiture expanded to become a means of documenting life. This painting is my rendering of Mary Cassatt, an Impressionist, in her piece, Sarah in Green Bonnet. With the rise of modern photography, though, painted portraits are no longer necessary as a form of documentation, and hence portraiture has taken on a whole new meaning. Photography has taken the place of painting as a documentation, and now it's pretty much expected to have photographs professionally done in most of the situations that would have warranted portraits earlier. People generally have pictures taken professionally when they're babies, when they graduate high school, and when they get married. If you photograph anything like I do, this is deeply unfortunate. Even though there are no portraits done specifically for funerals, it isn't uncommon to display pictures taken throughout a person's life at funerals, so portraiture still plays a role, though limited, in funeral services. Because of photography's ability to capture a moment exactly as it is, though, modern portraits are no longer focused entirely on realism and now aim to capture a mood or specific attributes of a person. Hyper-realistic paintings exist, but are no longer as admired as they once were. Since the classical era, portrait art has evolved from an idealized image used at funerals to a creative depiction of a person and their attributes.
All right, there we go. So those are just kind of brief examples of two of them. Again, I'm going to post full links to these later on. But one of the things that both of them do is they do a really nice job of having a really polished presentation, right? But also having really good research content going along with it. And being able to merge those two things for the final project, if you're able to do that, you're going to be in great, great shape, okay? So I'm going to post those on D2L under today, links to those two plus two others. You can check them out as examples of different ways you might want to go for this. So what I'd like to do now, feel free to bounce off if you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. For those who are interested in doing the final project, the honors project, go ahead and stick around here. And in 60 seconds, we're going to do a very, very brief kind of overview of what that's going to look like. And I'll take you through that. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and I will see you guys on Monday. All right, let's chat a little bit about the honors project. So first of all, to actually kind of officially get honors credit for this, go to D2L, the link is there, the assignment sheet is there. What you want to do is download that, then go to the honors project link, fill out your information, and you re-upload that to the actual honors website, and that'll let them know that you're doing this class for honors, okay? Now what we're gonna do here for this, and also feel free, if you're not in the honors program, but you're interested in anyway in doing something like this, maybe as part of the final project or something along those lines, totally cool, okay? Stick around, definitely feel free to stick around. What we're gonna do here is we're going to kind of participate in a kind of pilot virtual reality study in terms of trying to use virtual reality technology to better understand the ancient world and to teach with, okay? And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to focus on the site of Delphi in ancient Greece, which is one of these pan-Hellenic sanctuaries. It's one of the religious sites where Greek city-states from all over the Greek world, right? The colonies, Greek mainland, the islands, Western Anatolia, everywhere would come to Delphi, especially to consult the famous oracle. And what we're going to do over the course of this semester is we're going to do a little bit of research into the site. So you're going to start by reading some modern sources. You'll then read some of the ancient sources. And then we're going to recreate this site, okay? And so what's going to happen is that each of you guys are going to be responsible for one of the different monuments from Delphi, and you're going to use some 3D modeling software called SketchUp Free in order to recreate what we know about that monument, what it might have looked like, right? And so you're going to do a 3D recreation of this thing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to import all of these into a virtual reality space, lay them out as though they would have been there in antiquity, and then we're going to move through that space to see what it would be like for an ancient visitor to the site to navigate through Delphi. And kind of as we go by each monument, you're going to present, whatever it is you're talking about, whatever it is your monument actually is. So here's the site of Delphi. It is one of the most fabulous sites in all of the ancient world. If you ever go to Greece, I will come after you if you do not find a way to make it up to Delphi. It is so, so cool. And it's built into these steep slopes. So you can see this is the remains of the Temple of Apollo down here, the theater above it. What we're looking at down below are these treasuries. So different city-states would have treasuries there where they'd leave gifts for the god Apollo. And what we're going to do, right, we're going to turn it into, this is from Assassin's Creed, maybe ours won't be quite that detailed, but some sort of virtual recreation of the site. Now, to give you a sense for what the modeling software looks like and you can start playing around with it, I've got links on D2L so you guys start teaching yourselves how to use this. I haven't used it either. I'm learning this all on my own. But let me show you a brief kind of video on how this actually works. Let's see here.
What we want to do now is we want to start.
So in this one, the person's like using
so this is usually what that
using this software to construct a house. And basically what you do is you kind of pull and push, put different kind of shapes on there, and then you can pull and push them to get that 3D effect.
And it open. When we single click, we can draw a line up on this face. And so you can see I can move my mouse until you get this little indicator that says.
Okay. Let me get that off of there. Where is it? There we go. Okay, so a couple important things. So you don't have to have a 3D headset to participate. There's a desktop client that you can use, and so you can use your laptop or desktop to still kind of enter the 3D space if you need to. And it's not cheap to get a virtual reality headset. So you can rent one from the library for like $150. You can buy a brand new one for $300. All that's on D2L. You know your own circumstances, and you can make that decision accordingly. If you're like, hey, this is the perfect opportunity to get my parents to buy me a 3D headset, absolutely take advantage of that opportunity. If you can't do it for financial reasons, that's totally understandable. We'll still work with you on this. And then in the end, what's going to happen is we're going to go to where is it? Let's see, this space over here. And this program's called Engage. And what it is it's basically a 3D kind of presentation area. So you can kind of walk around, you can sit down, and then you can also present. So let's see if I can do that. Let's see here. Does that work? Sorry about the double authentication here. We'll see if we can get that to work. All right, and then the idea is that you can kind of give presentations in this sort of space. So what we're going to do is, in addition to this, we're going to have a kind of large open space where we can plan out our site and go from there. So I know I'm a couple minutes over. Apologies for that. Let's go ahead and get that off of there. There we go. Bring this back up. Bring the lights back on. And so what I need you guys to do in terms of the next steps, over the weekend, I'm going to put a spreadsheet up on D2L, and I'm going to email the class. And what I'd like you to do is kind of put your name on a list if you're interested in doing the final honors project. Whether you're in honors or just want to do it as part of your final project, that's cool. Put your name on that list. I'm going to have a list of monuments, and I'm going to have you select one of those monuments. You can do a little research if you'd like ahead of time, and then I'll email out with the next steps. So nothing else you have to do right now, okay? Just keep an eye out for that email over the weekend, and you'll be in good shape then. But I look forward to working with you guys on this, and we will take it from there. So what's this say? You have to make the document into a PDF file. They won't accept docx. I don't know exactly what that means. Anyway, okay, guys, awesome stuff. I look forward to working with you on this. Hang tight for that email, and then we'll answer questions next Friday as we go kind of move on with the project. So have a wonderful weekend, guys. I will see you then, all right? Bye, everyone.